this sidecar episode, we turn to one of the darker and more mysterious Grimm tales, Rumpelstiltskin. It's a story with sharp edges of impossible expectations, bargains made in desperation, and the dangerous power of the unspoken name. As with all these fairy tales, we're not looking to pin down a singular meaning. Rather, we're entering the dream of the story and letting it speak through the images. This one speaks directly to themes of the first house: identity, persona, survival, and the daimonic forces that come to our aid and demand a price. Rather than reading the whole tale in one go, we'll break it into 3 acts. After each, I'll pause and reflect. You're welcome to follow along, feel into your own story, and listen for what echoes. So we'll start with Act 1, The Bargain is Made. We begin with the miller, a father figure whose ambition eclipses the truth. He boasts to the king that his daughter can spin straw into gold, setting off a chain of events she never chose. This first act carries strong first house energy, an identity projected onto a child, an impossible task imposed before she's even found her voice, and a mysterious helper who appears in the dark. Let's listen to the first act of the story, and then we'll pause to explore what opens up. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." The king said to the miller, "That is an art which pleases me well. If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace, and I will try what she can do." And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room which was quite full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and a reel, and said, "Now set to work, and if by tomorrow morning early you have not spun this straw into gold during the night, you must die." Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more miserable, until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the mannikin, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and whir, whir, whir 3 turns, and the reel was full. Then he put another on, and whir, whir, whir 3 times round, and the second was full too. And so it went on until the morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night if she valued her life. The girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying, when the door again opened, and the little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin that straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring, again began to turn the wheel, and by morning had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not enough gold, and he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of this night, but if you succeed, you shall be my wife." And he thought, "Even if she be a miller's daughter, I could not find a richer wife in the whole world." When the girl was alone, the mannikin came again for the 3rd time, and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time also?" "I have nothing left that I could give," answered the girl. "Then promise me, if you should become queen, your first child." "Who knows whether that will ever happen," thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannikin what he wanted, and for that he once more span the straw into gold. And when the king came in the morning and found all as he had wished, he took her in marriage, and the pretty miller's daughter became a queen. So what are we learning so far about the first house through the story of Rumpelstiltskin? Well, We begin with the father projection. In fact, the girl we only know as the miller's daughter. That's her only reference point. She is just basically an extension of the father at this point. And so the father himself, who maybe has some unlived gold of his own life, decides that the best way to get out of his own predicament of being a miller, which in fairy tale language is being quite poor. This is also a theme reflected in stories such as The Handless Maiden, where we begin with a miller whose mill isn't bringing anything anymore, so he has to go even further down the ladder and head out into the forest to chop wood. So we have this miller who really isn't pleased with his lot in life and maybe has missed a few opportunities in his life and not made the most of his own gold. And so he projects all of that gold and all of that talent onto his daughter, and he goes to the king. And then this identity of one who can spin straw into gold is effectively thrust onto the daughter. It's not something that she asked for. It's not something that she wanted, but it's something that she has. And so that's where our story begins. And of course, that's a lot of pressure, that early identity. It's like a mask that is assigned before it's earned. And it's sort of like an ascendant image in the way, like in a way, you must be golden before you even know who you are. And so we have this heightened pressure to live up to the expectations of this talent that she's been given, but really has no idea how to do anything like that. And of course, that leads her into being locked away, in essence, imprisoned in this particular mask that she's been given. And the task, of course, is to turn straw, a fairly ordinary substance, into gold, which is incredibly valuable. So this is kind of like an alchemical metaphor here, where we turn the mundane experience of straw and turn it into something valuable through some mysterious force. But she hasn't spent any time on anything like that. She doesn't know anything about alchemical practice. So something that shows up a lot in fairy tales is the impossible task. And when our characters are given these impossible tasks, they often turn to the dejected state. If you think about the story of Psyche and Eros, each time Psyche is given an impossible task, she thinks that she's just going to go and kill herself, because it's effectively like, what can I do? I can't possibly make this work. But just like in her story, there's magical helpers. And just like in this story, our protagonist, she's also getting help. There's the emergence of the Daimon, who does actually know how to turn things into gold. But, and again, this is just like the Handless Maiden story, he's offering a certain power, but it's in exchange for a soul deep cost. So this is where we have to lean into our persona as a form of survival, which can often happen in our lives. We have to perform and bargain and survive. But while we're doing that, it can be at the cost of something, like we're disowning something fundamental. And another theme in this section is the temptation of ease, like what happens when we don't earn our own gold, when we skip the deep work and we outsource the magic. What might happen? And in this case, there's a sacrifice that's been made of her firstborn child. So ultimately, she has made her way from being a poor miller's daughter into becoming a queen. So her persona has worked for her, but we know that there's a dark twist here, and that this Daimon, originally she gives away the necklace, then she gives away the ring, so she's giving away her valuable things, but she has nothing left to give, and that ends up being an extraordinarily valuable thing, her firstborn child. So although she has become a queen, and she's moved from maiden to queen, which is quite a significant move in a character in a fairy tale, she's done it at a cost that is quite terrifying. And so there she is. So let's go into Act 2 now, the birth and the panic. So the girl survives. In fact, she not only survives, she becomes the queen. And the mask she wore becomes reality, but what was hidden beneath that mask now returns. The little man comes to collect what was promised, her child, her creative gold, and her soul. This second act brings us to the crisis point. The Daimon who once helped now becomes the threat, and the only way to reclaim her power is to name the thing she once bargained with. Naming, in this case, becomes a magical act, and the stakes are as high as they get. So let's return to the tale. A year after, she had a beautiful child, and she never gave a thought to the mannequin, but suddenly he came into her room and said, "Now give me what you promised." The queen was horror-struck, and offered the mannequin all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her the child. But the mannequin said, "No, something that is living is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." Then the queen began to weep and cry, so that the mannequin pitied her. "I will give you 3 days' time," said he. "If by that time you find out my name, then you shall keep your child." So there we have it, when the Daimon becomes the demon, and what began as a helpful figure becomes a terrifying one when ignored, denied, or not integrated. So this is the figure that could help her turn things into gold. It could get her out of trouble. It could fix her problems. It could, take care of everything in her world. And so think about that of, when we've made these betrayals over the time of our lives, when we've relied more on our mask than we possibly should, when we've developed that persona, that identity, that cornerstone of the personality, but maybe at the expense of the self. And then this figure that helped us, this persona figure that helped us, now it's come back. And what does it want? It wants the firstborn, and that is a symbol of, essentially it's kind of like when we get to the 5th house, we'll talk about this, because it's like the symbolic children. It's like our creative gold, and it's the formation of the actual individual. It's like what Jung called individuation and the process of becoming one's true self. And so this is the creative gold, the debt that comes due. And the unearned gold that we got is now the bargain that must be reckoned with. And there's really no way around it. And so then, interestingly, in this tale, and this is just such a classically fairy tale logic kind of a thing, it doesn't accord to, modern writing techniques or anything like that. The naming becomes the magical act. If she can name him, she regains her power, and if not, she loses her soul child. So what does this mean? Firstly, the shadow has returned, the shadow of the persona has returned, and it's the moment that disowned part of the self comes back and demands acknowledgement, and not just acknowledgement, that it be named and that it has a place within the psyche. And of course, she has no idea what his name is, no idea at all. She's obviously lost. And so what will she do? Well, this is the classic race against time. It's the archetypal 3 days, which is an echo of fairy tale initiations and trials. The 3 is an interesting one. It's like the 3 phases of alchemy, where we go firstly into a separation of some kind, and then we go through an ordeal, and then the 3rd time is a return. Also in fairy tale language, 3 often means like we have to endure. Like 3 can almost like be the number of infinity, or it can feel like a very, very long time. It also gives us that sense of story beat and repetition. And the number 3, which is quite a hermetic number, is the number of the storyteller and the trickster. And it gives us that sense, almost like getting into a trance state through the repetition. The 3 also has, in fairy tales, gives us the ability to sit back, relax, and dream into the story, knowing that we're going to hear the same things happen again and again. So we don't have to pay too much attention with our logical, linear mind trying to make sense of things. We can really allow the dreaming process to take a hold of us, or letting the dreaming process lead our exploration and our listening. We come to the final act, or the reckoning. The queen sends out her messengers, searching high and low, and in the deep woods one of them hears a strange little man dancing around a fire, singing a rhyme that gives away his secret. This is the moment when the unconscious is brought into the light. Naming the shadow dissolves its power. But even here, the story doesn't give us a neat resolution. the little man doesn't integrate, he disintegrates, and maybe that tells us something too. So now let's hear how the story ends. So the queen thought the whole night of all the names that she had ever heard, and she sent a messenger over the country to inquire far and wide for any other names that there might be. When the mannequin came the next day, she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthasar, and said all the names she knew, one after the other. But to everyone the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day she had inquiries made in the neighbourhood as to the names of the people there, and she repeated to the mannequin the most uncommon and curious. "Perhaps your name is Short Ribs, or Sheepshanks, or Lace Leg." But he always answered, "That is not my name." On the third day the messenger came back again and said, "I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain at the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, there I saw a little house, and before the house a fire was burning, and round about the fire quite a ridiculous little man was jumping. He hopped upon one leg and shouted, 'Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ha! Glad am I that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin I am styled.'" You may think how glad the queen was when she heard the name, and when soon afterward the little man came in and asked, "Now, mistress queen, what is my name?" At first she said, "Is your name Conrad?" "No." "Is your name Harry?" "No." "Perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin?" "The devil has told you that! The devil has told you that!" cried the little man, and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. So just as we're nearing resolution, in comes the messenger, the one who overhears Rumpelstiltskin dancing around the fire in the woods, singing his own name like a secret spell. And I'm just noticing here that it's starting to rain in Bali, so I hope you're enjoying the sounds of nature in the background. Anyway, and in a way, this messenger plays the most pivotal role in the whole story. He's the one who brings the knowledge back. He bridges the gap between the unconscious and the conscious, between what's hidden and what's revealed. And isn't that Hermes, the trickster, the traveller between worlds, the thief of cattle, the god of thresholds and secret knowledge, the daimonic whisperer who carries messages between mortals and gods, and in astrology between the individual and the sun? It's telling then that when the girl finally names him, Rumpelstiltskin cries out, "The devil has told you that," which could just as easily be, "Hermes has told you that." The messenger is a daimonic force, a little devil, a divine trickster, a gleeful shadow dweller. And like Hermes, this messenger doesn't take sides, he just delivers. What we do with the message, that's up to us. So maybe this final act isn't about defeating Rumpelstiltskin, but about integrating the trickster, making a deal with the shadow, learning to listen when the Daimon speaks, whether through dreams, intuition, mischief, or a stranger singing in the woods. And this is where it loops right back to the first house, the house of beginnings, breath, and naming. In traditional astrology, Mercury had his joy in the first house. Why? Because it's the house of the I Am, the place where the self first emerges, and who better to help us cross that threshold than Mercury? He's the god who guides souls out of the womb, out of the underworld, across boundaries. He delivers the name, the persona, the mask through which sound comes. So in this final act, when the messenger delivers Rumpelstiltskin's name, it's a kind of astrological initiation. The girl reclaims her power not by violence or resistance, but by naming the daimon. She brings what's hidden into language, into sound, into consciousness, and in doing so she becomes truly sovereign. Rumpelstiltskin vanishes in rage, but maybe not forever. Maybe he just retreats, waiting to be remembered again, when someone else needs to learn the power of naming, the magic of Mercury, and the dance between shadow and soul. So there we have it, the tale of Rumpelstiltskin, spun in 3 acts. A story about identity imposed too early, the price we pay to survive, and the long road back to reclaiming our name. The mask, the bargain, the shadow, and finally the naming, all first house territory. We don't get a clean ending. The little man rips himself into or vanishes into the earth, depending on the version. But maybe that's the point. Some parts of ourselves can't be tamed. Some daimons resist domestication. And yet, naming them is part of the work. Holding the tension between gratitude and discernment, between mask and essence, between gold and straw. Thanks for walking with me through this tale. The second house awaits.